Be
Right.
nervous.
Welcome, everyone, to the first ever live episode of Truth in the Barrel. We are so excited to have you all here. And hey, if you know of anyone who should be here, now is the time to go get them and send them the link that you're on right now and make sure that they know this live show is not to be missed. We're going to be talking about the rapidly developing situation in Los Angeles. We are going to be drinking whiskey, and we're going to be answering your questions tonight in our main segment called Cask Us Anything. I love that.
That's
So
the best.
Yeah, it's time to grab your beverage of choice. This is mine. We'll talk about that. Grab some popcorn. We got some of that too right here.
I have a
And
Guardians
get
of
ready
the
for a
Galaxy
whole lot of
book.
fun. Truth in the Barrel. Here we go.
Let's
All right, I'm Amy McGrath with my co-host Denver Riggleman, who is still dancing there. We're going to start out with our whiskey minute because that's probably the most important part of our show. So,
it
Denver,
is.
tell us what you're drinking tonight.
So I'm doing something a little bit different, even though we're live tonight. My wife, we just released an Irish style whiskey. You know, she's a bourbon maker extraordinaire. She wins all the awards, but she also likes to dabble with European style whiskey. So she had an incredible release in Irish, but I wanted to actually highlight what inspired her. It's the Green Spot whiskey from Ireland, right? And we do love Irish pot still whiskey. And it was this that got her thinking, could I do an Irish style whiskey? And she did. And she even finished it in sherry casks. But you know, you have green spot, red spot, blue spot, gold spot. You have the Irish spot whiskeys, and they're finished in different ways. So today, I wanted to do a green spot in honor of my wife's Irish whiskey release, which is sold out still at the store there. There's a few left in Pennsylvania, I think. But you know what I wanted to do, Amy? A nice barley filled right whiskey for us to get started. So I'm going to start with green spot today and say cheers.
Okay.
And I can't wait for this show.
Cheers. All right.
That's the way to get started right there.
I'm not going to get into too much because we have done Green River before, but this is what I'm drinking tonight. It's called Green River Kentucky Straight Rye Whiskey, and it's from the Owensboro area in Kentucky. So that's what I've got tonight. And before we start, because you just got back from Ukraine, and then we all want to know how you're doing and how the trip was, but something that I love that we haven't talked about before is the initial music to this podcast, to this show. And there's a story behind that. And would you like to know about that?
I would, because I thought that it was just sort of, I thought it was like an original Doug creation, our producer. I mean, when you said there's a story behind it, I felt a little left out that you guys have had this private joke on me for a long time. And I'm a bit sad.
Well, you know, when we were looking at doing the show, Doug said, well, what kind of music do you want? And I was like, I don't know anything about music. So what do you? And he sent me, and Doug's our producer. He's behind the scenes, so you can't see him. He sent me a bunch of ideas. They all sucked. Okay. They were all terrible. And so I was like, man, I'm going to have to figure this out myself. Now, and I remembered that my 8-year-old daughter had me download this app called Suno, Suno, that she heard about from her 3rd grade teacher. And it is an AI app. You'll appreciate this, Denver. Is an AI app where if you download it and you create a little account, it's free. You can have the AI create music for you. And you just tell the AI, you're like, hey, I want a theme song to a podcast. I want it to be short and something else. And what it did was it created the song, and then I get to tweak it. I said, well, it's too twangy. I want something that does this, or I want something more upbeat. And it keeps changing it based on your feedback. And that's what we came up with, what you heard at the very beginning here.
So your daughter should get producer credits.
She should. She
should get credits, right? I mean, she should be up on the screen right now. You know, in credits. The thing is, I have an AI company, and I'd be so excited about that. But really, when you said today, do you know where the song came from? We've been doing this show now since April? I'm like, I don't know. I thought I didn't know where it came from.
Yeah.
I feel a little left out.
Well,
But that's
well,
so cool.
you're
Go into some
getting back
popcorn.
from Ukraine and you're just still recovering, right? How's it
Mhm.
going? How was the
It's
trip?
going okay. Um, I just put popcorn in my mouth. Everybody should have popcorn. This would be the best show ever, better than any live show ever done. But it's interesting because I keep getting videos now from the people I was in Ukraine with, Amy. I got back Thursday at 1 in the morning, I think,
Mhm.
and we're doing a live show here on Tuesday night. So I'm my sleep's better. I'm still getting up between 4:30 and 5 a.m. every morning, which I know a lot of people do anyway. My first mornings though were 2:30 to 3, but I keep getting videos of the drone attacks. Two were just killed in Odessa, Kyiv. 7 of the 10 districts were hit last night. So if anybody ever, if we ever do a live show and I can actually give those to Doug, and if you want to hear a drone attack, what it sounds like when it goes right by your window or right overhead, I certainly can do that because I got to experience that. I have those videos of me taking the video
Yeah.
of a drone attack happening. But it's good to be back, and I know that might be another show that we do another time live.
Mhm.
But it is good to be back from Ukraine and to be with you, Amy. But I'm feeling good, and I think there's going to be some parallels in what's happening in Ukraine and some of the things we're going to be talking about today too.
Well, certainly really happy to have you back safe and sound here in the United States. I wish I could say there's not much going on here in the United States, that it's like super quiet and there's not much news, but that's not true. As you know, what's happening right now in the city of Los Angeles with Donald Trump, our president, nationalizing the National Guard and deploying the active duty Marines, United States Marine Corps, onto the streets of Los Angeles um, without the consent of the governor of the state, without the consent of the mayor of Los Angeles. First time in 60 years in which a president has done such a thing, and for purely political reasons. So that's kind of where we start tonight. I know there's going to be a lot of questions as we get to the Ask Us Anything part of this, which I'm really excited about. And those questions could be about anything. But I want to start there with you tonight.
Yeah, and I read something. There was a former general said something. He said, even if it's legal, which it's debatable, right? And we can talk about that, right? With posse comitatus, we're talking about the Insurrection Act, and I hope a lot of people are going to appreciate this, Amy, because me and you have war game this, and that's going to be pretty interesting to talk about with you. But I saw a general. He came on and said, even if it's legal, he said this is unprecedented, and it also shows that maybe we shouldn't be going down this path of the United States of America with what's happening. The other thing too, as we get started on this and what I want to go into, Amy, is where the algorithmic targeting for disinformation or misinformation that's happening on the Los Angeles riots. And yeah, as you know, that's sort of my background. It's what I did in the January 6th committee, but also identifying those bad actors. But it is interesting, Amy, we're talking about the LA protest, how you have some people using protests with isolated violence here and there. And then you have sort of the far right saying it's these massive riots where they need to deploy Marines and National Guard. So I think this is going to be one of those conversations where I think we can bring some light to the subject.
Yeah. And I mean, there's where to begin. First of all, um, to say that they're massive riots is, I think, a huge overstatement. Yeah, there are bad pictures, right? There have been 74 arrests by the LAPD. 74 arrests. Okay. Los Angeles County has 9 million people, over 9 million people.
9 million.
There's
That's
about
bigger.
4 million,
Huge.
4.5 million in Kentucky. We have on average per day throughout Kentucky about 500 arrests. So
Well,
LA is bigger than Kentucky in terms of population and has a fraction of the amount of arrests in these riots or protests. Look, the governor said that the mayor said the LAPD, not exactly the LAPD, and not exactly the bastion of leftward thinking, has said these are largely peaceful protests. We don't want the feds here in any form.
yeah, it's deliberate provocation. And, I want to say this, my family reunions are in West Virginia, Amy. We have 74 arrests after we have the jugs of moonshine come out. That's it's not uncommon. And 74 arrests in LA, for all the troops that are there, it seems to be disproportionate, doesn't it, Amy? Just a little bit. And I think, reporters are standing in front of the one place they can find a fire. I remember, I've been a congressman, as you know, and you've been in media doing so many things where you ran for the Senate, you ran for Congress, and you know that they stage where you're at, right? And I think what we're seeing right now is they're looking for that one place that looks the worst. Now there's some bad pictures there, and we can talk about optics, and people probably shouldn't be running through the streets in Mexican flags, setting things on fire. Bad. Nobody likes a writer. Nobody likes somebody who does that. There's nobody who's going to support that. But we also have to be honest, right? That most of Los Angeles is peaceful tonight. Almost all of
Yeah.
it. It's
Yeah.
only small, tiny sections. And so if you have this disinformation push, propagandists, and you have let's be honest, this is a photo op for the president to have troops there, National Guard and Marine Corps, and to have ICE there with the National Guard surrounding them as they take people out. This is simply popcorn porn, right? For people that are really into just getting the immigrants out of here and hating brown people instead of really stable, sort of secure coverage of this by the media.
Well, I also think it's really dangerous for our military and for our country. The use of the military in this manner. I know that the general and there's some dubious legal explanations for this whole thing. It's very much a gray area, and you and I, we did this when we did last summer. We did a bunch of tabletop exercises. I call them war games, whatever you want to call them, with the Brennan Center about what a second Trump presidency would look like. And it is playing out almost exactly what these exercises, foretold. And one of the things that we learned in this is that there are laws surrounding the use of military force within the domestic capacity, but those laws are not very well understood. There's a lot of norms behind it. We have a president that doesn't understand norms. The legality of this action is dubious. The law currently says, and it's the posse comitatus part of it, says that the United States military cannot be engaged in domestic law enforcement. So that is like the norm in our country every day. So that means they can't do searches, seizures, they can't detain Americans. There's an exception to that. That exception is called the Insurrection Act. So the president can invoke the Insurrection Act. He has not done that in this case. He instead is using Title 10 of the US Code to justify the calling up of the National Guard without the consent of the governor and the mayor. You only need the consent of the governor and active duty military. And in Title 10, what that basically says is that you can use the military against any rebellion against the United States. So he is now saying his language, Trump's. That's why you're hearing Trump say these protests equal a rebellion against the United States. And just to be clear, that's never been done before in the history of our country.
Well, there's two things here. Number one, you see over and over the use of the word insurrection, and everybody who's watching, just watch the word language, right, of what's happening, or the word usage, what's happening with this administration. So you see Hegseth and Gabbard and Patel, obviously Trump and Vance and all the far right influencers, the MAGA media ecosystem. They're using one word over and over again, Amy, and that's insurrection. Mm-hmm. And when me and you did these wargaming with the Brennan Center, I got to play President Trump. I know that's Amy, I don't know if you were at the one where I played President Trump or the one where I played Mike Johnson, the speaker. But when I played Trump, you're right, Amy. I don't know if you remember this, but one of the feedback sessions there, the people playing the Democrats said this. They said, well, we're going to sue. We're going to sue the president to stop the deployment of troops for the Insurrection Act. And I was playing the president. I said, I don't care. They're still going to be deployed. They didn't know what to do, because anytime that they said that they wanted to use legal authorities to stop the president, I said, how do you stop me as commander in chief? How do you stop me from deploying troops? You cannot.
Right.
How are you going to enforce that action? And so what everybody's seeing here, what Amy's referring to, when you're talking about posse comitatus, when you're talking about the Insurrection Act, if you can convince a significant portion of the American people that there's an insurrection / rebellion / invasion, What stops the president of the United States based on propaganda, disinformation, or anything of that nature? What stops him from invoking the Insurrection Act or martial law? And it's so incredible that 4 or 5 months into this administration, Amy, we sort of called it that it would
Yeah.
be a slow, like this escalation, and bam, right?
Well,
We're going to see something happen where the Insurrection Act is actually deployed.
we called it. We all thought the Insurrection Act was going to be deployed. Now he hasn't done that in this case yet. But what he has done, in my mind, right now, I think is actually worse, because in the Insurrection Act, it's usually used. Of course, he doesn't follow norms, but it's usually used in a certain time frame for a certain specific purpose, for a certain specific location. So what he's done right now, I think, is worse, because he has come out with this proclamation, which is vast and open-ended. And Trump's new proclamation, his order that federalizes the National Guard to be deployed, Denver, anywhere in the country at any time, without any governor's consent. You don't even need any governor's consent anymore, according to this proclamation, even for things in the future. It is unprecedented. It is a major shift in civil military relations. And it's no kidding, 4 days before the No Kings protests, which are going to be happening all around the country. I mean, this is no joke right now.
It's interesting, and with everybody watching this, I find it absolutely captivating that we have a president who says he can deploy the National Guard anywhere without a governor's consent. And you really can make 8 people burning a fire in a trash can look like an insurrection, depending on how you frame it. You can do anything. And we already know that this administration has picked incompetence and loyalty over competence, and people that are straight up conspiracy theorists. Anybody can go look at Kash Patel. Anybody can go look at Tulsi Gabbard. Anybody can go look at Kristi Noem. Anybody can go look at RFK Jr. Anybody can go look at Marco Rubio, who chose a white nationalist to be a deputy undersecretary, and Darren Beattie. Anybody can look at these individuals and say, maybe, Amy, just maybe we don't trust their judgment. Maybe they're not telling us the truth. It's possible, right, with algorithmic targeting over social media, that what's being painted isn't exactly what's happening in that specific area. I can tell you guys right now that's 100% true, right? This is not hard to do. It is not hard, right, to put that type of propaganda into the ecosystem based on algorithmic targeting, based on who you're signing up to, based on what you're clicking on. Not a big deal. So what scares me is this: is somebody who did military intelligence, somebody who is very good at this. I'm not saying, Amy, that I employed propaganda against American citizens, but I know that's done. But what's incredible to me right now is that we have propaganda, people with bad judgment, people with bad intentions, making decisions like Pete Hegseth, who we can say nominally has a white nationalist tattoo, right? Making these decisions in a vacuum based on propaganda and based on unprecedented decisions against the American public. And I don't know where this ends, unless it does end with the Insurrection Act and martial law in some of these places, which then that's a deliberate provocation where you're going to see more violence based on the fact that these things are being done without the violence actually being there anyway.
Yeah,
and I know that was a mouthful, but that's really what we're seeing right now.
And I'm not going to say that there's no violence, right?
No, that's not the
Los Angeles Police Department has said these are largely peaceful protests. They've arrested 70 some, but they have come out repeatedly and said, we've got it. We've got it. We don't need you. We're the Los Angeles Police Department. It's not like they haven't done this stuff before, And so when I get asked, what should we be alarmed about? Because a lot of people are like, well, they could always use the backup, right? From the National Guard. I mean, shouldn't they just get the backup? What harm is in that? Look, when you send active duty Marines, you should be alarmed, because the United States military being sent to police First Amendment protesters is just not something we do in this country. And then on top of that, you're taking United States Marines from 29 Palms, where their base is, and you're taking them away from their training, away from what they do on an everyday basis, which is our missions for our national security, being ready for that stuff. and you're taking them and putting them into Los Angeles. They're not doing their normal training. That's not where we need them to go. We do not want Marines to be policing largely peaceful protests in this country. It's also strategically bad. I mean, we've got all of these aggressive countries around the world, North Korea, an aggressive Russia, China, etc. And we are now focused. We're turning our might of the Department of Defense and focus on the streets of Los Angeles, California, for no reason. And the optics of our Marines confronting American citizens exercising their First Amendment rights. I mean, it's not where we should be.
It's not like it's Snake Plissken trying to get out of Escape from LA. I hope I said that right. I'm sure people said Snake Plissken. Kurt Russell played him in Escape from LA. It's not like that, right? It's ludicrous. I think also what people should be alarmed about is we have a president who doesn't know the difference between an insurrection, right, and him falling up the stairs on Air Force One. Here's the issue. This is a guy who pardoned 1,500 January 6ers, and I was on there. Somebody who didn't call that an insurrection, but a day of love. But we only have 74 total arrests in LA, and all of a sudden we have an insurrection where we need to deploy, Marines, active duty Marines, but also National Guard. The people that are sane, the people that tilt towards rationality, should absolutely be horrified by the stupidity and ignorance that they see spewing from the White House. And I'm not trying to overblow it myself. I'm not trying to be hyperbolic. What people need to be worried about is that there's a manipulation of media content that can make it look a lot worse than it actually is. And if you splice that correctly with the type of words coming out of an administration with 77 million people that voted for him, you have hate and discontent being the primary driver of policy. That hate and discontent is based on fantasy. That fantasy being a president who actually agreed with what happened on January 6th, but thinks that this provocation of ICE and what he's doing now is somehow an insurrection when people are protesting against that, especially when you see things like, was it Abrego Garcia, right? And the lack of due process there. So it's interesting to me that we have a president that's that unstable, that did pardon people who actually were involved in an insurrection. I think that's what troubles me, Amy. It really does.
Well, and we're going to get into this tonight. I know, because I know people are going to have a lot of questions. But one of the things I want to talk about is why do you think Trump is doing this? I think it's obviously part of the plan that they had for a long time to create this sort of chaos around an issue that they feel like they have an upper hand on, to create more power, for himself. And to me, it's an intimidation of peaceful protesters. So it's a way to stamp out anybody that doesn't agree with Donald Trump. I mean, that's just the start of it.
They're also getting really good content for the 2026 midterms. So what I think you have are Republican media consultants rubbing their hands in glee because they're getting these images, right? They want an image of an immigrant standing on top of a car with fire surrounding him, holding a Mexican flag, vice a U.S. flag. But what you're going to see is you're going to be selective cuts that are going to be used in swing districts. And I would say, I know me and you have talked about the political voting index or the PVI, and if it's R+5 or whatever like that. But I think in R+2 to R+8 districts, Amy, I think you're going to see a playing of these images over and over again. I think they're looking at this as a really strong play to maybe mitigate what they think might be a blue wave. That's a huge part of this. I'm telling you right now that those videos are being cut already. I think also, why is President Trump doing this? I think he's a true believer in the people around him, like Stephen Miller. I think that he has been, bought into this anti-immigration stance of people who have real mental issues. Again, I don't want to stress this too much, but you do have people that are conspiracy theorists. And I don't like to use the word evil too much, but stupidity and ignorance looks a lot like evil. There's a correlation there. So I do think there's a stupidity, ignorance, conspiracy theory, anti-immigrant hatred type of bubbling fantasy brew that the president has bought into, and you're seeing him make these decisions in this bizarre vacuum of
Yeah.
autocracy and idiocy. And I think that's what bothers me again very
Yeah.
much about this whole situation.
Well, and I agree with you. I think he wants the situation. This guy Homan, this guy Miller, Stephen Miller, they want the situation to get worse. They want more Mexican flags. They like the images of tear gas. They want that chaos. That helps them because it helps them create this image of a national emergency. You know, so you're absolutely right there. And I never thought about, well, I have thought about it as used in political ads. And I have thought about it because in my race, both my races, my opponents used pictures of rioting
Mhm.
that happened when they were in office as, hey, this is what's going to happen if you elect Amy McGrath. And the interesting thing to me, like looking back on that, is all of those pictures, all of that has happened under Trump. It hasn't happened, it didn't happen during the last administration. It happened during the first Trump administration, or it's happening right now. And the other point I want to make is when we think about, well, why is Donald Trump doing this? Yes, he loves to be a strong man. Yes, he may want to distract from the miserable stuff that's happening in the economy, the loss of manufacturing jobs, the tariff debacle, the Elon Musk, breakup. But I also think there's a thing here where Donald Trump wants to prove to the military and to the country that the military is his and he can do whatever he wants with these toy soldiers of his. I mean, this is why Hegseth fired the Jags, right? I mean, we're seeing right now Donald Trump using sort of bullshit, dubious U.S. code to justify stuff that should not happen, that in a normal presidency would be illegal. And we're all kind of like, can he do that? And
I
the
mean,
military is kind of like, yeah, I guess he can do that. But it's never been done before. But this is his way of saying, I own you.
well, he has a military parade coming up, Amy. Boy, all this folds right into it. And I think people like me and you are going, what the fudge?
Yeah.
About what's going on. Everybody here watching it. I know Doug, our producer, just like, God, thank God he said fudge. I know he's saying that right now. But get out the popcorn though, because I'm going to tell you over the next, because over the next week it's going to get nuts. But I know me and you, we got a lot of stuff to talk about.
We do. And we want to bring everybody in on this, right? So this is our first live show, and you can go ahead and throw your questions into the chat, be a part of this conversation. So that's we'd like to start this this segment called Cask Us Anything, which I think is a really cool name, if I might add. Cask Us Anything.
Yeah,
so let's do it.
Popcorn and whiskey.
Mm-hmm.
We're ready for questions.
All right. Let's send it.
Send it.
All right, yeah, Denver, you got the first one.
Sure, I'd like to do that. So I saw Fetterman's comments. Excellent question from Derp State Radio. Thank you very much, Derp State. The greatest name of all time, I think.
Question?
The question is, are any thoughts on Senator Fetterman's recent comments about the protests?
What were his comments? I don't know.
His comments generally were that he supported the intervention that was going on in there. And please tell me if I'm wrong, team, but I think that's pretty much what he did when I looked at Fetterman's comments. He was pretty much saying, hey, there shouldn't be anybody that's, trying to support these protesters. We have to stomp it out. Anybody's ridiculous who tries to support what's going on with the riots. I think it was sorted down that line, unless he had another comment afterwards that I didn't read. But I think Fetterman has gone so far over to this bizarre place where I don't know if he's trying to look like he's in the middle or trying to look sane. But I do think he ignores basic facts about what's going on the ground and automatically buys into any narrative that looks like it's something populist that he can grab onto. And to be completely blunt, I don't know if he's fit to be in the Senate anymore, and we can have that discussion down the line. But I do think that this is a guy who sort of lost himself regardless of the reasons, and he automatically tilts to the right because he's going to come up for re-election. But I think he believes anything he reads, and I don't think he really has a lot of nuance of thought when he goes into these type of comments that he does on Twitter or he does on social media.
Well, I'll make 3 points real quick, and I don't know Senator Fetterman at all, and I don't know exactly what his comments were, but if he's talking about, the heavy-handedness or he's supporting these military deployments, the 3 comments I would make is, one, we are all in agreement that there should not be any looting or violence. Like, no one is for that. No one. Protesters need to remain peaceful. That is very important. And protesters do have rights. They have First Amendment rights in this country. So we can't forget that. So that's number one. Number two, most Americans right now disapprove of the deployment of the National Guard troops and the Marines. Okay, there was a recent YouGov poll that got released this morning, I think, and it says, ask Americans, do you agree or approve or disapprove of deploying the National Guard? It was 38% approve, 45% disapprove. When they asked about the Marines, it was 34% approve, 47% disapprove. So most Americans think they're not in a good spot. And the third piece of this, with regards to the employment of the troops, we know as veterans, Denver, you're a veteran, I'm a veteran.
We certainly are.
We know what real threats look like. And this ain't it. Okay? The LAPD can take care of this. There's some burning some cars. I gotcha. This ain't a real threat. We don't need to be deploying troops.
Nope.
Okay. Nope. So I would I don't know what Senator Fetterman said, but if it was, we need to do this, I'm certainly not in agreement with that.
Well, now, I was right. Mr. Fetterman goes, I unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstrations, immigration. This is anarchy and true chaos. No, it's not. Fetterman needs to go to Ukraine if you want to see anarchy and true chaos, right? I mean, are you kidding? I mean, it's ridiculous. Loses the moral. He said they lose the moral high ground when Democrats refuse to condemn setting cars on. That's not what's happening.
We're always going to condemn setting cars on fire. We're always going to condemn that.
It's like it's like Fetterman wants to be in Love and a Bear, so he covers himself in honey, runs through the woods. He's so thirsty for attention. And I think when you see something like this, you can say, I unapologetically stand for free speech, peaceful demonstrations, and immigration. But you can say, those who are committing crimes should be absolutely prosecuted by law enforcement authorities that are duly supposed to do that. We probably shouldn't have That's a much better statement that still says, I don't like crazy, right? Instead of saying this is anarchy and true chaos, not even identifying the provocation from Trump himself, and not even knowing that this very algorithm is going to be pushed to the far right to talk about this. And again, if you're actually a public servant, be careful how you present yourself. But I don't think that's even happening anymore, Amy. I think me and you might be the last of the Mohicans when it comes to people who are fact-based.
I don't know.
Right? And sort of,
I do have friends in LA, and I've talked to them, and none of them have said, I'm living in chaos.
Nobody's snake foot skin.
Hey, it's great here.
It's not escape from LA. It's so bullshit.
What else do we got? Do we have
all right, I'm ready for another question.
Right. Here we go. Sean.
Oh, go ahead.
Sean Sublette.
I know Sean. He's a good man. Sean Sublette. He's actually a meteorologist here in Virginia. I mean, he is the man. He's the. Okay. I cannot believe he's on here.
Maybe he could tell us if it's going to rain or shine in DC. But he wants to know if. Do you think if things will remain peaceful in DC this Saturday? Yes, I do. The protests that are happening, the Kings, No Kings protests, which, by the way, everybody listening, if you care about our country, you should find one that's near you. There's like literally hundreds of them going on around the country, and just go out there peacefully and, be out there. But there's not one in DC. The one that's in DC is the Army birthday thing.
Military parade.
Right. Mm-hmm. And I don't think there's going to be any, my hope is that there isn't any issues. I don't want there to be any issues. The Army deserves a good day of everybody saying rah, rah to the Army. They're 250 years old. I wish that they weren't putting on a parade for that. But,
my biggest worry, Amy, is some chucklehead is going to try to run in front of a tank screaming Tiananmen Square or something, and that's, there's always, the threat of somebody who wants to, be on TV or say, we shouldn't have a military parade. Listen, everybody's like, here's what's going to be the standard, right? This is going to be what's media. Oh, we're actually celebrating the 250-year anniversary of the Army. Yes, it's on Trump's birthday, but it's just happenstance, and he would have done this anyway. That's what's going to happen. It's obviously untrue. That's going to be the narrative. They're going to try to paint it that way. And anybody who's against this military parade, Amy, you know what you are? You're unpatriotic.
Yeah.
You're a traitor, right? So that's the kind of stuff you're going to see from far right media. Everybody's like, Denver, how do you know? Well, I was a former Republican congressman, and I know. So that's what's going to happen. I bet you, I hope everybody comes back. We do our next live, and I bet a free drink if you come to my distillery that's going to who's going you better right and Sean might come to my distillery. I bet a free drink that the narrative is going to be it's about the Army, not Trump. It just happened to fall on his birthday. This isn't about being a strong man. I bet that's what's going to be. And if you're against it, it means that you are the one who's a conspiracy theorist. You're the one who's actually fell to disinformation because Trump would have done it anyway, which we all know is bullshit. So that's sort of the issue that we have right there. So another thing, and I know that we have other questions, but Amy, I got to do this.
I just feel bad for the U.S. Army because we should be celebrating their 250th birthday. That they have so much heritage and history with the U.S. Army. We should be talking about that. I hope we talk about that on Unfiltered this week, by the way, when we do our show on Thursday, because that should be the story. And that this whole parade is being eclipsed by Trump, by this guy who wants to be like Kim Jong-un. I mean, he wants the tanks rolling in the streets. And here's the other thing about the parade. I always worry because if you think about parades, military parades, it's always like the old technology rolling through the streets, the like stuff as you and I who were in the military, we'd look at these pictures and be like, dude, we could defeat that. And I worry that we're like doing the same thing.
Yeah, I don't know if the T-34 tank is what they want to be parading in front of Red Square, right? And since with our M1A1 Abrams now, people say, well, Denver, they have the T-92 tank, so we can go into that. But you're talking about the Junger, right? Kim Jong-un. I call him the Junger. I hope everybody does now.
Kim Jong-un? I don't know.
Yeah, Kim Jong-un. Yeah. So, but their hair is very similar. I don't know if you noticed, Donald Trump's hair and Kim Jong-un's hair are becoming very similar, which is odd. But again, we are having a military parade in Washington, D.C., and I just can't believe that we've gone to that point. And now, I know, like Denver, let's move on. So you want me to read the next question?
Yeah. Let's do it. Yeah.
Okay. Non-American here. Well, thank you for joining us. Do members of the military have to obey the president if the orders are illegal? What happens if they disobey? Oh, okay. Amy, do you want to take it or I can go? Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot there. So first of all,
yes,
the Popcorn big answer is yes. Members of the military need to follow legal orders. They are obligated to follow legal orders. They have a duty not to follow illegal orders. So if for example, if you're in a combat zone and your commander says, I want you to shoot point blank range all of these civilians and execute them, that's actually an illegal order against the laws of war. And you have a duty not to do that. I think that the problem is in this gray area, right? Where the order is legal because there's nothing stopping the president from giving an order to, for example, deploy troops to push back on protesters, or having pilots fly fighter jets or Blackhawks over protesters to scare them. That order is it's still legal. And so they have to follow that. It can be lawful and awful at the same time, which is why the job of commander-in-chief, the job of president, needs to go to someone with character and honor. And of course, we don't have that right now. That's my answer.
I think that could be a tagline. It could be lawful but awful. I like that very much. Also, if I'm an E3 in full kit, right? Say I'm an E3, E4, Marine, Army, National Guard, whatever. and I have my E6, right, or I have an O1 or O2, right, like a squad lead or something, and they're like, "Hey, right, I need you to go over there, and I need you to protect the arrest of that person from ICE, or I need you to push this crowd back." They're going to follow that order. They're not even going to,
Yeah.
Amy. They're not even going to.
Yeah,
This
they're not
isn't.
going to question it.
They're not going to question it. And as it escalates, if it does escalate, the thing that you're going to get in trouble with is what if you have a 22-year-old or 21-year-old E3 or E4? As you see this escalate, who has to engage? And I think that's when the questions could get really hairy. If you see a military member actually take out a civilian, I think, I don't want to go back to Kent State. We can go back to, some of the times that this has happened. But if you have a young person who's incredibly well trained and they are carrying live rounds and they're kitted up and they're told to go make sure to take care of this area, right? We need to police it, get over there and do it. And if there's some kind of provocation, my worry is that they're going to automatically go to training, right? It's going to be automatic. And I think, again, people have been in the military. I think that's what worries them, right? Is what happens then. So this is a great question
It is.
from our friend, but Amy's right. There's a gray area here, and there's nothing that I see right now with the deployed Marines or the National Guard where at this point there's any unlawful orders happening. Sadly,
Right.
that's where I'm at on this.
That's right. So three things, too, a couple other points. One, Marines are trained to kill. Yes, the comment on the Marine Corps has said, okay, my Marines have done some riot training in the past. Okay, I've been a Marine. Yes, we do training for lots of different things. That is a very small part of what you do. You are mostly trained for war. You are trained to kill for the most part. And that's what you want from Marines. You want the police to do police stuff. You want the Marines to do Marine stuff. Okay. And that's not hanging out, doing riot control. So that's point number one. And what you said, Denver, is also really important. That 22-year-old out there, you don't want them to be making decisions like, oh, was that a lawful order or not? You don't want that. You want them to obey. That's what that's why the leadership part of this is so important. That's why the firing of the JAGs at the beginning of the Trump administration was so alarming to me and to anybody that has held any rank in the military. Because those are the people you go to when, as a leader, when there's some gray area, you kind of look to the JAG and you'd be like, hey, show me the parameters here. They're the ones that do that. And when you replace them with, yes men that are going to say, oh, do whatever you want, that's alarming. And the third point that I want to make on this is you can't expect the private first classes and the corporals and lance corporals to have these decisions on their back on these really bad choices, because they have to follow orders, and they will get court-martialed if they do not. They will get court-martialed. So
they don't want that.
And they can't speak up. They can't be like, I think this deployment's bullshit. They can't do that, folks. So you're never going to hear our military do that. We got thousands of military members on the border right now. You know what I guess they're doing? They're probably pulling out concertina wire, ringing it out, pulling it up, ringing it out, pulling it up. They're probably not doing anything, guys. But they can't say anything. They're not allowed to.
Well, there's so many people, that have served in the military that don't know what I'm going to say here. And Amy, it's so basic and blunt and down the line. But for everybody listening, the thousands online, you know what you're worried about too? You're worried about your EPR or OPR. You're worried about your evaluation. You're worried about how your peers think about you. You're worried about making sure you do the right thing and that the buddy beside you is protected. They're going to default to order within their squad, their platoon, underneath whoever they are at that point. They're going to default to their commander and their on-field site commander. That's what's going to happen. And again, that's why you have this cascading effect, Amy. From January 20th to now, you talked about all the bad decisions, right? Removing the JAG, institutional anarchy and chaos, removing the checks and balances of the United States government. all this can lead to a very bad outcome. And when you see bad decision making, like deploying Marines and the National Guard to LA, that's when you're like, well, okay, lawful, awful, bad, but they're going to do what they said they're going to do. What does that altercation look like? And I want people to think about this. Can you imagine? I was a 22-year-old airman. Amy, you were young, right? I mean, you were a
Long
young
time ago.
officer. I started as enlisted and became an officer. I was a Mustang. But I remember years old as an E3. If my master sergeant came and told me to do something, it was hop too. You weren't effing around.
Mhm.
That's what you're seeing out there. That's why I love these questions. You're seeing crazy things happening. And I think that's the stuff that's going to, that's the stuff that's really going to bother me if that is something like that happens to some poor troop at 22 years old. Oh, a
All
question.
right, what do we
Amy,
got
you
here?
reading this one?
Yeah,
All
I'll
right, you
read
want me
it.
to
It
read it? You
says
got it.
it's from
Okay.
Tim Price. He says two things for me: Denver, best and worst memories from Ukraine, and both. Do you see anything breaking this fever of disinformation and shit that has captured America and is spreading?
Woo. All right, best and worst memories for Kane. Let's start on, do I see anything breaking the fever of disinformation and shit that has captured America and is spreading? Tim, no. Um, and Amy might have a different answer. But when you're talking about disinformation specifically, I'm seeing the bloom happening at an even faster pace with what's going on in LA, but what's going on in Ukraine, which is going to be a great segue when we get there. I think what you're seeing too is the far right media ecosystem is getting so strong. I mean, I know there's some out there who's saying they're taking the mantle for the left or the center, like, the Midas touches of the world and things like that. They cannot match what the overarching just sort of volume from the Megyn Kellys and the Candace Owens and the Ben Shapiros and the Alex Jones and the Mike Flynn's, right? As I go down the line, right, of Fox, of Newsmax, right, of all the people, the Matt Walshes, the people that you might even not have heard of. If there's a lot of people in the center left, or center right, you might not have heard a lot of these far right prognosticators and propagandists that are out there just spitting crap everywhere, and they have millions of followers on YouTube. They get millions of views. Even the craziness that sometimes trickles to Joe Rogan and stuff like that. You can't fight that disinformation and propaganda. There's a flip to this, though. I'm not saying it's all negative, Amy, and I'd love to hear you before I go in Ukraine. There's the flip, though, is that I think we do have this opportunity to go house to house. We have this opportunity now to. I use that, I love, Hunter S. Thompson and the £1,000,000 shit hammer, right? But it's using a facts-based £1,000,000 shit hammer that you have to confront every single person who brings you disinformation. You have to do it. And I do think that there are some self-inflicted wounds happening from the Republican side. And I think even though I'm not really bullish that there's going to be great things to come out of LA, I do think there could be some of that 1 to 3% that looks at what's happening and say, man, should we have Marines there?
Mm-hmm.
That's,
Mm-hmm.
but I do think the disinformation bloom, especially what's happening in Russia. And I want to let you go first, Amy, before I go to Ukraine. But that disinformation bloom has really, really exploded over here, even since January 6th.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add, except the disinformation is real. It doesn't mean that we throw up our arms and say, can't fight it, it's too much. We have to. We have to. This is our country. And I think there is value in continuing to push out truth. Now, you're right. That ecosystem, that decentralized right wing disinformation ecosystem is huge. But I'm an optimist and I believe in just everyday communication with your neighbor, with your family. And it could come down to this. If somebody asks, well, there's a lot of chaos, there's those illegal aliens are ruining our country, or whatever it is that might come out of people's mouths, you simply say to them, where have you seen that here? Where have you seen that in Edgewood, Kentucky? Where have you seen that in Fort Mitchell? Where have you seen that in Charlottesville? Show me. Where would you see that down the street? Because when you bring it back to people where like, yeah, maybe that is on Twitter, and just to try to remind people that some of the stuff that's being blown up isn't. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. It does exist, but it's not as like, we're not in a national emergency right now, guys. I know that LA, you can call them protests, you can call them riots. It's not a national emergency. I'm just telling you, it's not.
It's not. No, and I just find it so intriguing, right? That we're talking about, disinformation, how it spreads, and what we're doing. And I'm so happy you're an optimist. I am, Amy. I mean, it actually warms the cockles of me heart, right? That we do have to go, sort of door to door, and you have to confront your neighbors, maybe compassionately, maybe not. But I think there's an exhaustion to me of doing this for so long, where I try to ask the three main questions, right, Amy? What's your information? What's the source of the information? And how did you come to a conclusion based on that information? That's how I like to start, right? And it really does trip some people up because when they say, what's the information? They even have a tough time saying what that source information is, right? And then
Yeah.
you're like, well, where did you get that information? Well, I saw it on Facebook.
Okay. Right.
And then all of a sudden you sort of got the hook in, right? But also you got to be really careful because they're going to think you're calling them stupid immediately, which sometimes I do just say you're stupid. So, but that's just from exhaustion.
Not but recommended with your neighbor.
No. And I have done that.
Tell us about Ukraine, though. That was a great question about your.
It is, and best memory Ukraine. I try not to get emotional about this, but it's Father Augustine. I'm not a very religious person. I wish, right? It'd be great, right, if there's some overarching thing helping me out here. But I will tell you, if anybody were to make me religious, it's Father Augustine in Kherson. And my best memories were both in Kherson, where my worst memories were sort of. Best memory was Father Augustine. We're there and we walk in, we sort of get snuck in, right? We had to park under a tree because of the FPV drones, first person view drones that have explosives hooked to them that will kill you. They're suicide drones or kamikaze drones. So we park under a tree, we get into a nondescript vehicle, a left-hand shift CRV with a right-hand drive. We go to the church, one of the last wooden churches in Kherson, hasn't been destroyed, but a big church next to it. We get snookered in there. Right. And we're there and there's only 5 or 6 people and we're interviewing a leader of the resistance, incredible lady who had just lost her son and talking about the drone finder that saved her life that came from her son right before he died. And you're like, Denver, how is this your best memory? The memory of that lady in Father Augustine's church, the pain and the horror, and then her saying, but we have to do what's right for our people. And Father Augustine, as this is happening, he lifts up 2 lids and he has massive bowls of food to feed all these people. Where are these people, Amy? There's only 7 or 8 of us in here. Outside, people were crouched under camo netting, and Father Augustine is feeding everybody under the camo netting to protect them from drone strikes. The best and worst all in one thing, right? And I can talk about the girls of Kherson, the teenage girls who helped target the Russians, which is insane. I can talk about the strikes in Odessa and Kherson, me hearing drones go by my window, running into a bunker, right? And there with people with their kids, right? And they're there and they're just chilling. And when the alert was over, they just walked upstairs, Amy, like it was no big deal. And the Americans are looking around like, what the hell? Wait, we could go back upstairs, Hell, I heard a freaking, I was at the barber shop today and somebody had a razor. It went off. I thought it was a drone, So, that's, but yeah, I think
about the long-term PTSD
of all these people and people, yeah, you're right. And people sending me videos, but I think it's the fact that if anybody were to make me religious, it's Father Augustine. And if anybody would make me believe in humans, it's that incredible woman that is still there trying her best to help everybody after her son was just killed and showing me the drone finder that saved her life that her son gave her right before he was killed by Russian troops. It's all wrapped in one, Tim, but it's the best and the worst of human nature all in one thing.
Yeah, that's incredible. That's incredible. We have time, let's see, for maybe a couple more or one more question, I think. Here's one from Melissa Renner. Earlier in the show, Denver said he was playing Trump and said, quote, he is going to do it anyway. So besides suing, what can the Democrats and us as citizens at large do?
Do you want to start that one?
No.
Or would you like? No. So
That's a
I
resounding
love a
you
live
go
show.
first.
Thank you, Amy. And thank you, Melissa. I need a couple things of
thank you.
popcorn because this question is not going to be answered in a way I think that's really happy.
No, it is like a really important $1,000 question, though.
It's $1,000 question, and of course, Melissa, thank you. And going live when you get these difficult questions, there's a part of you that wants to stay optimistic.
You can go out and protest, peacefully protest. That is what we can do right now as a citizen.
You know, you get to a point where you feel like you're helpless. You get to a point that you feel like you can't do this anymore. That the illogic, unreasonable, conspiracy-based, hate-filled idiocy completely consumes you. Like, well, what do I do? I did say he was going to do it anyway because there is no way to stop him if you don't have a judicial system and a legislative system that has integrity or follows what the Constitution wants us to do. Mm-hmm. So what do you do when you have a commander in chief? Listen, the Supreme Court, they pretty much made him untouchable. So we're in this bizarre situation that you have somebody who thinks they can act like a king based on the fact that he was elected. And then you have him doing things that seem to be completely against the American fabric of what we are, what we stand for. And you're like, besides suing, what do we do? Alyssa, that's a very tough question. We talked about going house to house. We talked about confronting your neighbors in an intellectual way. I don't want anybody going out and, fisticuffs. But there are some other things you can do. There's a great quote, and it's Plato or Socrates. And I'm sorry, guys. And it pretty much just summarizes this. If you don't get involved with politics, you're doomed to be ruled by fools. It's something like that. You have to be involved on a level that you never thought you could even grasp. And that's funding candidates that you like, that's becoming a candidate, that's actually getting in the dirt. And a lot of people say, if you get in the mud with pigs, right, the pigs like it, they're going to beat you, right? But when I get in when I get in the mud with the pigs, I want to make bacon, right? And you have to fight. You have to confront. You have to get involved in the political sphere. You have to tell people to their face they're wrong. And it's hard because they're too dumb to think, right, that they are wrong. Remember, stupidity is a terminal disease for the most part for a lot of people. And I think, though, if you can confront, maybe you can help them with that disease. Maybe you can get them to come over to where at least they're sane and rational in their thinking. It's one-on-one. That's what we can do. People are going to go out there and do social studies. They're going to, and they're going to go out there and say, oh, look, in this district, maybe we can do this. Maybe we can fund this person. We can do that. But what it comes down to is you and your friend and that friend's friend has to be involved. It's not sitting in front of the TV. Mm-hmm. It's not pointing going, they suck. That doesn't help anybody except you get to scream. Mm-hmm. You don't want to be just screaming into a popcorn box your whole life. Right?
Yeah.
So that means you got to walk outside. You got to look around and say, I'm going to protect the American ideal.
Well, I really appreciate you going first on that because it gives me a chance to sort of listen to you and reflect. And I do things in threes, right? So I've got 3 things now just after listening to you. The first one is we have this system. It's, this system of 3 branches of government, the courts, Congress, and the presidency. So if you're asking what we can do, we can't do a whole lot about the courts, right? The courts are doing themselves. Unless you're like on the sitting bench, you're sort of like a spectator there. Congress, we can do something. And what I mean by that, like, and I'm not just talking about elections. That's the third thing, by the way, that we can go do things like protest. Why does that matter? It matters because it gives backing to members of Congress to be bolder, to stand up. So there's backing for like their leadership. You would think that members of Congress would just lead on their own, and some do, but many do not. And so it's really nice to have that backing. Some of that backing comes from polling, but some of that backing comes from like holy shit, there's like 100 different protests going on around the country. That's a lot of people. Like, then that backing, I think, helps. It helps Democrats. It helps governors stand up for what Democratic governors stand up for what's right. It helps Democratic lawmakers stand up for what's right. So that's number two. And then the third thing is what you said, Denver, which is a little bit further out, but that is elections. Elections are how we change things in this country. Elections matter. They matter all up and down the ballot. And they don't just matter in November and October and September of election season. We're not the UK. We don't have like an election season. Maybe we would like to, but we don't. We have to work on elections even now. And that means supporting candidates. It means running for office if you can. The most important money that goes to candidates is the early money. So it means getting involved in that stuff in ways that you may not have done before. So that's my spiel.
It's beautiful. And there's two things that I like to tell people, and I know some people have heard me say this, so I hope you're ready, Amy. Number one, sociopaths only feel pain. Number two, most politicians only react out of fear. If you get involved and they start to fear for their seat and they fear for their little power trip and they're not going to get the first reservation at the Capitol Grill, right? Or they're not going to be, treated to a free coffees every day at Bob's Diner because they're the local assembly person. That's when they actually react. And those two things, if you think about those, sociopaths only feel pain and most politicians only react to fear. You'll start to be able to dig down into the motives of people who you think are bad actors or aren't doing the right thing for the community. And at that point, you can start to rally. And what I want to tell people is this: it's hard to be brave, right? When you're dealing with somebody who is so sure that they're right and they're not even smart enough to realize they're wrong. Like they never will be. But don't. You're right. If you're basing yourself or what you're saying on facts, right? And facts-based data, or data-based facts, if you're doing that, you're in the right. Don't be afraid. Screw it. Go in. You only live once, baby. Let's rock and roll. Swing the hammer. Drag the axe. Do all the cliche things I'm telling you intellectually. Don't actually bring an axe in there because then people are going to think you're nuts.
But it does remind me of something, when I always ask a question of like my mom that I'm not sure about. She's a scientist, she's a doctor, right? And her response when I had some wildly crazy thing to tell her is, well, that's not what the data says.
That's it. It's just that's mom.
Polite way
Mom's
of
a badass.
saying, that's not what the data says, And then how do you refute that? All right, we got to get to one final question because everybody has a life and they need to move on from tonight. And we had just an amazing first live show, but let's get one final question tonight. You want to read that then?
Sure. This is from Ethan Anderson. Ethan, what's it like working together on this show? Oh man, Ethan, tough question. It's a tough one.
I've learned a lot. Let's just say.
Amy, do you want to start?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think it's been a lot of fun. And I think you do a lot of things in this world that, you do for work. A lot of politics isn't a ton of fun. But I wanted to do something that was enlightening to people, talking about the truth, because I do think the truth really matters still today. I'm not one of these people that's like, the other side is spewing a bunch of lies, so we need to counter with a bunch of lies of our own. I'm not that person. I really believe in the truth. So I wanted to do something where we talk about what's going on today with somebody that has that attitude. And Denver, you have that attitude. And so it's been a lot of fun. I mean, I don't always laugh at your jokes, but
you should. They're so funny.
Yeah. But it's been fun.
It's awesome. No, when you asked me to come on to do this with you, and I think people need to know that Amy called me because she thought I was so valuable. But I think that Amy wanted to do something unequivocal, where You have somebody from the center left and the center right talking about policy, but doing it in a way where it's truth and facts based. I think also it's an honor when somebody calls you with the history that Amy has and what she did to get here and the challenges she went through. And I have a really strong family, strong women in my life, incredible wife, incredible kids. But when I see somebody like Amy, it's what I want my daughters to aspire to. And, you know, Amy not only has an incredible family, she teaches, she's done things historically that just can't be copied or mimicked or imitated. And I think when you have people that really care about being Americans, that have served together, that have been in the military, that have done things that are just insane in a good way. And when I get a call like that from somebody, it's not just respect, right? It's this deep and yearning like for people that see the world in a facts based way and want to help others just based on, a DNA that says, I want to help. And I think that's what it's like working with Amy McGrath.
Well, I appreciate that. We have a good time, and we're doing what I think we need to be doing right now for our country. And that has always been something that when I look inside, I'm always the kind of person that says, what am I doing right now for my country? What can I do right now for my country? And so this is not all of it, but it's some of it. So I appreciate you doing this with me, Denver. And I appreciate all of you who are out there listening. This is our first live show. We have 2 shows a week that are not live. One is unfiltered, which goes over sort of the news of the day and the week, what happened that week. And then we have a deep dive episode called Devil's Cut, where we talk about one topic. So it's really good stuff. I encourage everybody to stay tuned and still be involved.
Yeah, I do too. And, if you want to keep hearing incredible content like this with Amy and myself, things like this, right? Jokes for your kids, right? Me and Amy can do that too. Like, what's green and healthy and sings nothing but a hound dog, Amy?
No idea.
Elvis Parsley. So if you want
But
clean
see, they
jokes
don't
like
know that
this,
kids don't know what Elvis Presley. My kids
well,
don't
I
know.
don't know. I guess it's for Gen X's. But what I'm saying here is remember the socials. If you want to get incredible content like this, you can mix with us live, right? And party with Amy in Denver. Please subscribe to your favorite podcast. Make sure you download Truth in the Barrel. Go to YouTube and subscribe. Make sure you follow us on socials, and we're everywhere, even Truth Social. We're brave souls. But if you do that, I promise you, me and Amy will keep bringing the fact-based funk right into your living rooms.
That's right. Next live show, we'll talk about our call signs, how we got them, and thanks for listening and being a part of this, everyone.
Everybody have a great night.
Good night.